Hi everyone and welcome to the Unit 5 test for Part B of U.S. History. This is the modified version of the test and I will be reading the the questions to you along with the answer options to help you along with your test. This test has 27 questions, and question number 28 is an essay question worth 20 points. Please do not skip this question. I frequently go over this question in advance in unit test reviews with you, and you should have an answer prepared for that essay before you even enter into um, the test or before you even start the test. Okay, on this version of the test, you can also just use this document to view the essay question and prepare in advance as well. All right, so submitting your test, please make sure that you submit this test completed to me in Kmail. The test is scheduled for Friday, January 18th. Please make sure that it is submitted to me before Tuesday, January 22nd, on Tuesday, because we have off on Monday for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I will be putting in zeros and updating the gradebook on Tuesday the 22nd. All right, so let's get started with your test. The first question is, what was the underlying cause of the Cuban Missile Crisis? The establishment of a communist nation in North America, Fidel Castro threatening to attack Florida, or a U.S. mission to intervene in the affairs of Caribbean nations? Number two, what happened at the Bay of Pigs? Cuba repelled a U.S. sponsored invasion by Cuban exiles. Soviet ships assisted Cuba in turning back an invasion by Cuban exiles, or the United States avoided a direct conflict with Soviet forces. Number three, when surveillance planes revealed the possible installation of Soviet nuclear missile sites in Cuba, what action did President Kennedy take? He abandoned his plans to form an alliance with Cuba. He initiated a naval blockade to prevent Soviet ships from reaching Cuba with nuclear weapons, or he threatened the Soviets with a nuclear attack from the United States. Number four, how did the Cuban Missile Crisis end? An explosion in Caribbean waters scared all nations into limiting nuclear power. The Soviet Union removed its missiles from Cuba, and the United States agreed to remove missiles from Turkey, or the United Nations intervened and achieved successful negotiations with all parties. Number five, why did President Eisenhower believe it was important for the United States to provide aid to Vietnam? He wanted to establish bases in Asia that would be close to China, Japan, and the Soviet Union. He thought that if one Southeast Asian nation fell to communism, more would follow. He believed it was the duty of the United States to assist all nations in need. Number six, what ended French colonial rule in Vietnam? The Treaty of Paris, defeat in the Gulf of Tonkin, or the defeat at Dien Bien Phu? Number seven, what was the domino theory? The idea that the decisions to be made in Vietnam were black and white, communism or democracy. The idea that the situation in Southeast Asia would require a blocking strategy, or the belief that if one Southeast Asian nation fell to communism, others would follow. Number eight, who was the North Vietnamese communist leader during the Vietnam War? Was it Tan Son Nhut, Ho Chi Minh, or Ngo Dien Diem? Number nine, what was the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution? A congressional action taken to end the war in Vietnam, the formal declaration of war in Vietnam, or the congressional authority for President Johnson to send troops to Vietnam as he thought necessary. Number 10, what did historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. mean by the term Imperial Presidency? The increase in executive power that President Johnson's actions in Vietnam demonstrated, the increased importance of the president's role during a war, the tendency for presidents to behave as kings during times of war. Number 11, who was General William Westmoreland? The military commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, the general who urged President Johnson to withdraw forces and limit U.S. actions in Vietnam, or the Air Force general who led the forces bombing Cambodia. Number 12, which was a challenge to U.S. forces in the Vietnam War? A lack of modern weaponry, a shortage of soldiers, or lack of a defined front? Number 13, what was one significant objection voiced by Doves opposing the Vietnam War? U.S. troops should not be engaged in guerrilla warfare. The United States was interfering in what was essentially a civil war, or too many college students were being drafted. Number 14, many prominent Americans opposed the Vietnam War. Who was not an opponent of the war? Actress Jane Fonda, Senator John Stennis, or Senator William Fulbright? Number 15, why did the United States use chemical warfare during the Vietnam War? To demonstrate how cleared land could be used to create military bases in which to station forces and supplies, or to destroy the forest so troops could locate the Viet Cong. Number 16, what was the significance of the 1968 Tet Offensive? It was an American victory that occurred very quickly. It was a military defeat for the North Vietnamese, but a psychological victory. It was an American defeat with a very high casualty rate. Number 17, what action did President Nixon take that increased opposition to the Vietnam War in the United States? Failing to use Henry Kissinger effectively, giving up North Vietnam, or the bombing of Cambodia? Number 18, what was the final outcome of the Vietnam War? The fall of Saigon and a unified communist nation, the fall of Hanoi and a unified democracy, or a negotiated peace? Number 19, what was Students for a Democratic Society? A 1960s student organization that supported the war, a conservative student group of the Republican Party, or a 1960s student organization that opposed the war? Number 20, what group rejected the traditional values of the establishment during the 1960s? The Democratic Party, the Young Americans for Freedom, the era's counterculture? Number 21, which event in the anti-war movement resulted in the deaths of college students at the hands of National Guard troops? Sit-ins at Columbia University, the March on Washington, or Kent State University protests? Number 22, what was the feminine mystique? A Betty Friedan book which inspired the second wave of the women's movement, Anita Bryant's book explaining how gays could become part of the social landscape, or the last option, a psychology book that addressed ways for women to use their feminine wiles? Number 23, what is the Equal Rights Amendment? A proposed but unratified amendment to ban sex discrimination, an unratified amendment that protected student rights, or an amendment that protected voting rights for all Americans over the age of 18? Number 24, what was the effect of the women's movement on society? An increase in the number of women enrolling in professional schools, an enormous increase in the number of women in the Senate, equality of pay for male and female professional athletes. 25, gay and lesbians, American Indians, and Hispanics all organized to advocate for their civil rights during the 1960s. What inspired them? The women's movement, the African American civil rights movement, or new legislation? Number 26, how did the increase in population among the Hispanic community affect their civil rights? They had increased political power. Their civil rights were more limited because of increased poverty. There was no effect on their civil rights. Number 27, which Hispanic leader and civil rights advocate founded the National Farm Workers Association to promote rights through nonviolent means? Cesar Chavez, Juan Coronado, Victor de la Cruz. Number 28 is your essay question worth 20 points. Review the list of events below. All occurred during the 1960s and 1970s, and all helped shape the future of the United States. Choose the two events that had the greatest long term impact on the United States and explain why you chose each of these events. And as you can see, the events that are listed here are the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam War, development of the counterculture, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy, the anti war movement, the women's movement second wave, the Hispanic rights movement, or other minority rights movements. This question is worth a total of 20 points, so please be careful and note that you get 10 points for each event that you're choosing and the explanation that you give. When you're finished with your test, make sure that you save your answers onto your computer and K-mail the completed test back to me. Good luck on your test. As always, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact me.